The combination of genocidal intent and the fact that these actions, they fit within the different elements of the genocidal acts that are enumerated by the Genocide Convention, leads to the inevitable conclusion that Israel is committing and has been committing genocide in Gaza. This revisionism is merely an attempt to justify the prolonged silence of so many, and the reluctance and the delay and the avoidance of these different kind of political and media and academic elements in Western countries who did not want to recognize the genocide, who did not have the courage to recognize the genocide and to call it out earlier. I'm Dr. Nimer Sultany, a Palestinian human rights lawyer, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Palestine Yearbook of International Law. I teach in the law school at SOAS University of London. Well, obviously, in the context of Gaza, we have seen right from the beginning statements of incitement to genocide, as well as expressions of genocidal intent from various elements of the Israeli government and political class, as well as many of the commanders and senior commanders of the Israeli army. And this includes public letters to the soldiers that were published by the most widely read websites in Israel, such as Ynet, as well as throughout the attack on Gaza, petitions signed by tens of senior commanders that call for genocidal acts against the Palestinians, as well as denying the existence of innocents in Gaza and calling for the elimination of Gaza, the extermination of Palestinians, the flattening of Gaza, the burning of Gaza, and all of these kind of expressions in which there is an attempt to deny the distinction between combatants and civilians, between innocents and militant fighters, and the attempt to impose a collective punishment on all the residents of Gaza because of the 7th of October events. So obviously these kind of expressions of intent, as well as continued incitement to a genocide by many public figures and journalists on TV screens almost in a daily fashion for over 18 months in Israel. This and obviously these TV programs and these articles and tweets are read by the soldiers themselves, and the soldiers themselves were describing their own actions as they were doing them on social media and in other outlets. So when you consider the initial expressions of intent, the continued expression of intent, the continued incitement to genocide, and when you consider the totality of Israel's actions in Gaza, which included the violations of basic rules of lawfare, the violations of fundamental principles of international humanitarian law, and the unprecedented size and effect of destruction on Gaza and all aspects of Palestinian life in Gaza, including the destruction of objects that are indispensable for the survival of the civilians, such as hospitals and cemeteries and schools that in particular served as shelters. When you add to that the fact that they have killed unprecedented numbers of journalists, unprecedented numbers of humanitarian aid workers, and including internationals in Gaza, and the fact that they continued over these 19 months to say that they wanted to make Gaza uninhabitable. The many elements in the Israeli government, and increasingly so in recent months, have said repeatedly that they want to expel the population of Gaza. They want to take control of the territory in Gaza. And the fact that many of these Israeli ministers had from the beginning the ideology of Jewish supremacy, which dehumanizes Palestinians. And this ideology of Jewish supremacy has obviously been institutionalized through occupation and the apartheid systems, and the International Court of Justice in the advisory opinion in July 2024 have laid bare these realities of occupation and apartheid, and the denial, long-term denial of the right to self-determination by the Palestinians, and the fact in order to discriminate against the Palestinians and deny them basic rights, you are basically dehumanizing them in order to explain why they are unworthy of equality and freedom. So this was also the background for the ideological and legal structures that enabled, after the October, the genocidal attack on Gaza. The combination of genocidal intent, the fact that there is an attempt here to eliminate the Palestinian population, and the fact that these actions are they fit within the different elements of the genocidal acts that are enumerated by the Genocide Convention, leads to the inevitable conclusion that Israel is committing and has been committing genocide in Gaza. Now, recently, there has been an attempt to what I call revisionism, which is an attempt to claim that Israel's attack on Gaza has been a war for the majority of these months. And then it evolved into a genocide after Israel broke the ceasefire in March 2025, declared a siege, and then started another brutal military action called Gideon's Chariots. But this revisionism is merely an attempt to justify the prolonged silence of so many, and the reluctance and the delay and the avoidance of these different kind of political and media and academic elements in Western countries who did not want to recognize the genocide, who did not have the courage to recognize the genocide and to call it out earlier. Because if you look at the current actions that are called Gideon's Chariots, or accompanying the Gideon's Chariots military campaign, there is not much new with respect to what we have seen before. First of all, in the 19 months, we had 3 sets of provisional measures by the International Court of Justice. And according to all assessments of academics, international organizations, and independent observers, Israel has consistently failed to comply with all these or any of these provisional measures by the International Court of Justice. Now, we need to remember that these provisional measures are attempts by the court to say you should not do X and Y, otherwise there is a risk of genocide. So the fact that Israel violated these tools that were supposed to prevent genocide is in itself an indictment of Israeli actions, and shows that what was a risk of genocide, if these actions were implemented, becomes a genocide over a long time. So Israel, in defiance of provisional measures, with full knowledge of the effects of its actions on the Palestinians, in particular the fact that when it continues to destroy the hospitals, schools, and agriculture sector and all the civilian infrastructures, it creates the conditions that will lead to the physical destruction of the Palestinians as a group in Gaza, because in order for groups, social groups, to survive, they need the essential. They need subsistence, they need healthcare, and so on and so forth. And recent, obviously, statements in the last few months by Minister Katz have also shown that starvation and siege are deliberate, man-made policies to destroy the Palestinian group. There is not much that is new in terms of Israel's declaration of intent, the savagery and the barbarism of Israel's execution of its attack on all aspects of life in Gaza, and the so-called ethnic cleansing or the forcible displacement. Again, it's a recurring or recursive element of Israel's attack on Gaza. And then that conduct is accompanied by an endless supply of genocidal statements and incitement to genocide against the whole and the entire population of the Palestinian people in Gaza. So the only inevitable conclusion from this conduct, this pattern of conduct and these statements is that Israel has been committing genocide and is committing genocide in terms of the international legal scholars and human rights advocates, as well as the genocide experts. An increasing number of UN officials who have avoided using these terms in the past are now saying it's a genocide. Now, the reason why this consensus is emerging because first of all, the Israeli intent has been clear from the beginning. It has been a live-streamed genocide. The Israeli intent and conduct have been repeated with increasing brutality over time. Now, one of the attempts is obviously to say that the war became aimless after a certain point of time. But again, even those who said these things are now, some of them are saying now it's genocidal in the public sphere. Now, it seems to me now the only ones who are actually aggressively denying that Israel is committing genocide are those who are propagandists, Israel's propagandists, and hardcore Zionists who don't want to see Israel's actions in any bad light that delegitimates it, who don't see Palestinians as human beings, who are themselves part of the infrastructure and the ideology that enables the genocide to happen in the first place, let alone the long-standing, decades-long apartheid system that Israel imposed on the Palestinians. Because all of these systems of apartheid and genocide requires justification, and these Zionists and Israel's defenders and propagandists are obviously at work to do that. They also, I would assume, that if the systems of repression that we see now, in particular in North America, but also in other places like Germany, were not in place or were to be replaced by a more democratic system that allows for free speech without fear of prosecution or retaliation or loss of jobs, I would assume there would be many, many more academics, media outlets, politicians who would call out the genocide, like the rest of the international law scholars, human rights advocates. The attempt to designate what Israel has been doing in Gaza as war rather than genocide is not convincing. First of all, even if it's a war, according to the Genocide Convention, genocide can occur within the context of a war. But more importantly, in this context, we don't have two armies that are fighting to each other. The gross asymmetry of power is very clear and overwhelming. So for the majority of the time, what we have seen is that Israel has been destroying civilians and civilian structures rather than engaging in a proper military action in a classical war between two armies. But more importantly, in the case of Israel, Zionism from the start, which established the Israeli state, aimed at the replacement of the Palestinians, aimed at the denial of their rights over their homeland, the expulsion of the Palestinians from their homeland, and dehumanizing them as residents without political rights over their own homeland. The denial of the existence of the Palestinian people is a constant feature of mainstream Zionism. And the Nakba itself was a genocidal act, even though it preceded the Genocide Convention. Because if you go back to Lemkin's definition of what constitutes a genocide, it's the destruction of a society and the imposition of the pattern of the oppressor or the occupier on the ruins of the destroyed society. So in 1948, over 530 Palestinian villages and communities were destroyed. About 1 million Palestinians were expelled from their homes. And the Palestinians' social continuity and cultural continuity was in many ways destroyed in most of Palestine. And the policies of Judaization and the confiscation of land that followed and continued till this day. So we need to understand that the distinction between war and genocide in this case is related to the fact that those who are considering it a war are ignoring the context in which the dynamics between the oppressor and the oppressed and the occupier and the occupied happens in Palestine, and the repeated nature of the Israeli attacks on Gaza and the siege on Gaza and the 16 years or so that preceded the attack. Without considering the occupation, which was considered by the ICJ in 2024 as unlawful, without considering the context of racial segregation or apartheid, which was also named by the ICJ in July 2024, we are ignoring the context in which Israel's actions have unfolded against the Palestinians before and after October 2023, have paved the ground for the ultimate destruction of the Palestinians and the Palestinian resistance to apartheid and occupation in Gaza and more generally in Palestine.